everyone, Clio here, and it's time for the September end of month wrap up. So in my end of month wrap ups I always do a wrap up of the books that I read, and then I also go through the books that I hauled during the month in order to kind of figure out whether I was able to reduce my physical TBR, yes or no. As I did in the month of August, I also filmed a mid-month wrap-up, and so I will link that one down below in case you're interested in any of the books that I read in the first half of this month. Books included in that wrap-up will be The Gospel of Loki by Joanne M. Harris, You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson, The New Wilderness by Diane Cook, The Dragon of Ynnis by Minerva Cerridwen, and Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno-García. So for the second half, let me quickly dive into 3 books that will also be featured in a future video, in the next video that's coming up on my channel, because these are books that I read for the Booktube Prize. So I will link the channel for the Booktube Prize down below, and actually the announcement for who the winner of the Booktube Prize 2020 is came out a day before you are watching this video. I'm still waiting for the announcement, but it is coming out on the 3rd of October, so you guys can watch that video down below. So Booktube Prize is a prize by the community of the best books of the previous year, so we read a lot of books from 2019, and we've gone through a couple of rounds in order to determine the best ones. There are 6 books that are finalists, and I only had to read 3 of them because 3 other ones I had already read throughout the year, or even some in 2019. But so the first one of these that I'm going to be talking about is A Single Thread by Tracy Chevalier, which is a book set in the interbellum, in which we're looking at one of these surplus women. So surplus women are basically, because of the war, a lot of men had passed away in the First World War, and so there were a lot more women than there were men, and so these women were kind of referred to as surplus women because the goal for all women at that point in society was still to get a husband, to take care of their husband, and to get children and take care of their children. So these are all considered surplus women in the sense that they are not serving that purpose. And so it's going to be looking at the way in which a woman navigates that atmosphere, navigates that society that's totally not prepared for a woman serving in any sort of other capacity. And while there are things about this book that I liked in terms of that premise and in terms of looking at that sort of type of character, I thought that it was very interesting, and I had like high hopes for it. It definitely didn't really succeed in that premise, in my opinion. The book was kind of bogged down with a lot of details surrounding embroidery and bell tolling, which at first is kind of interesting and gives you a lot of depth to the time period, a lot of depth to these sort of lost arts that are no longer like really that prominence within society. However, we really went very deep into that. I felt like the author was kind of putting all of her research into this book rather than just using her research as a foundation and then putting the stuff in the book that she feels necessary for the plot or for the enrichment of the world. And in terms of this storyline of this independent woman, I was not very happy with the way in which this story concluded. I felt like we could have gone with a much more revolutionary storyline, especially considering the fact that it is written current day. If this was written at the time, I could forgive it for what it did, because that was probably already revolutionary enough. But with the fact in mind that we are writing a feminist book from our current day time stamp, I would have liked to see this protagonist embrace an even different future than she did. And then the second one I'm going to talk about is Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Lefteri. So this is a book in which we're following our protagonist, who is a man who was working as a beekeeper in Aleppo. However, when the Syrian war breaks out, he and his family decide to go on the run. They become refugees. They try to make it into the UK, where one of their family members is waiting for them. It's all about the trials and tribulations of living a life as a refugee. It definitely is a hard-hitting book, though it is handled with, like, it's not so tragic that you're bawling every single page, but it definitely is looking at some of the horrific moments of their existence as a refugee, but also very much focusing on the impact it has had on them mentally. They're definitely both suffering from PTSD, and I liked how the timeline works for this one. So we are like each chapter starts out in current day timeline, where we have them in a sort of like intermediary house in the UK waiting for the decision to be made whether they will become citizens of the UK or not. And then midway through the chapter it will shift back to their experiences as they were refugees. I like this one, but it's not anything like spectacular, it's not anything special. It's exactly what I expected going in from this, and that's definitely okay, but that also means that it wasn't one that's going to stick with me for a very long time. And then the third book that I read for the Booktube Prize is Women Talking by Miriam Toews, which is a story in which we're looking at the Mennonite society. So this is a sort of, like, consider it like the Amish. This is a sort of society that is living with no modern day tools, and they're very much isolated from the rest of the world. The women in this society, for example, are illiterate. They only know how to speak their language, and Mennonites use an ancient version of German apparently, so it's also a language that nobody outside of the Mennonite society would know. So they have no literary skills, but they also don't have any sort of outside world knowledge. They never leave the settlements where they are living. The men, on the other hand, do from time to time, so they do have a little bit more of world knowledge, and they are also the ones who know how to read and write, and who are then interpreting the Bible for their women. So a few years now the women have been getting attacked regularly. The men have told them that that is because Satan is visiting them because they have sinful thoughts. However, it turns out that it's actually a couple of men from the society themselves who have been raping these women. And so while the men are off to town because they need to try and get some of these men released from jail, the women are having talks about what their future is going to be like. Are they staying in the Mennonite society, or are they leaving and exploring this great unknown world that they know nothing about and in which they don't even know how to speak the language? I thought it was very interesting. It went into a lot of deep discussions about deep topics such as forgiveness, such as you know, the goal and the impact of religion, and so it had these very interesting discussions, but it also at no point hooked me. It wasn't a very enjoyable experience to read this book, and while I do commend the sort of debate that is sparked within this book, all in all it's one that didn't really do a whole lot for me. So these are the 3 books that I read for the Booktube Prize. Apart from that, I also have a couple of other books that I finished. First off, let me talk about the 2 ARC copies that I finished this month. First of these that I finished is The Perfect World of Miwako Sumida by Clarissa Goenawan. So in this one we are looking at the life story of Miwako Sumida, who has committed suicide at the beginning of this novel. So we're looking at her life through the lens of 3 people who had a close bond with her. We're looking at the perspective of Ryusei, who is basically her unacknowledged boyfriend throughout the biggest chunk of the story that we're looking at. We're looking at a friend of hers called Chie, and then we're looking at Ryusei's sister Fumi, who is a transgender woman. And through all of these 3 different perspectives we will be uncovering other puzzle pieces to the life of Miwako Sumida. I think it's a very beautiful, quaint, charming, small story that really dives into the topic of grief, and it's also very, in my opinion, it's great for its transgender representation as well. All of the characters within this story very much respect and acknowledge Fumi's new identity, and very much love and respect her for who she is and acknowledge her for who she is. I love the bond between Ryusei and his sister. They have been through a lot because they were orphaned at a young age, and so Fumi has had to take care of Ryusei all of her life, has had to give up a lot of her dreams in order to have these possibilities available for Ryusei later on. And so through these different perspectives we're looking at different parts of Miwako Sumida's life, different parts of herself that she was perhaps saving for certain people, or that certain people have uncovered but that the others won't know about. And apart from that, of course, we're also diving into some of these sort of personal struggles of these characters themselves. So for example, Chie is a character who has struggled with like loving herself all of her life. She's always considered herself to be a little bit of a sort of like bland person who doesn't really get a lot of spotlight, so she calls herself a little bit of a transparent person when she was a child, and then she kind of started to develop this sort of alter ego by writing a sort of journal entry about a fictionalized version of herself, and through this writing she also kind of transformed herself into that character in itself. But then it will also be looking at how she kind of felt like she was an imposter a lot of the time, because she was always saying like, it is this alter ego that people are liking. It's not me as a person herself that they are liking. Second arc that I read is Earthlings by Sayaka and Murata. This was one of my most anticipated reads for this year, and it's also one of my most unique reading experiences that I've had this year. So at the 36% mark of this book, I was so close to DNFing it, to putting it down. I pushed through because it was an advanced reader copy, and also just because while I said I was going to DNF, I'm somebody who almost never DNF, so who knows whether I would have actually gone through with it. But I'm very happy that I pushed through, because that second half of the book very much suited my tastes again, and I thought that second half was great. So my overall opinion of that book I can't really give you. I would have to reread it to know like if I reread it, would I feel differently about that first half or not? But so we are following our protagonist Natsuki. So this is another piece of Japanese literature, by the way, by Sayaka Murata, who is the author of Convenience Store Woman. Convenience Store Woman was her first translated piece of literature, and really immediately came out with a bang within the English-speaking community. But so Earthlings will probably have a big impact as well, though I do think that there will be even more of a polarity between people loving it and people hating it. So in Earthlings we're following Natsuki, who is at the start of this novel, she's a young girl who kind of feels like an outsider within her family. She feels like her family would be this sort of like perfect family unit if she just wasn't in it. So she often starts to like use her powers of invisibility so that she's not seen by her parents. Early on it becomes very clear that Natsuki has a very big imagination, and that she uses this imagination as a sort of coping mechanism to deal with some of the more complex and dark feelings that she has, and some of the more dark experiences that she has in life. Because not only does she feel like an outsider, but it's definitely clear that her mother definitely beats her down a lot more than is healthy for a young child. So her self-worth is definitely being beaten down by her mother. There's also instances of physical abuse, and there is sexual abuse by a teacher. And this sexual abuse, especially for me at least, was extremely triggering. So we definitely do go to very graphic representations of sexual abuse of children. There's a very uncomfortable scene involving a menstrual pad, for example, as well. So there are definitely a lot of triggering content to this book as a whole, that if you want to know about the triggers, you can definitely go to my Goodreads review, where I have all the triggers for all the triggers that I recognize for the entirety of the novel as a sort of like spoiler that you can click on. But so there's a lot of, there's definitely a lot of triggering content, and that could definitely push people either way, especially because Sayaka Murata has a very straightforward writing style. She has a very no-nonsense, a little bit distanced writing style that I feel in combination with this very heavy subject matter, with these dark triggering contents, it definitely heightens the sort of impact that these scenes have. But so I feel like that first third of the novel is a little bit more of a setup to kind of build up a background story to Natsuki and to another character, Yu, that we will be looking at, in order to just have a background to that character to use throughout the bulk of the story, in which we're going to be looking at the way in which Natsuki, her husband, and this cousin from her childhood, Yu, how they try to escape the sort of like norms and conformities of society. They often use a sort of metaphor to describe society. They refer to society as the factory. The factory is this heavily oiled machinery, this perfectly balanced structure that is maintained in order to have the species maintained. So the big goal of the factory is to keep the species thriving, is to keep on producing babies so that the factory can keep on working. And so Natsuki and her husband have actually entered into a sort of marriage of convenience, just so that factory members won't come knocking at their door every single day, like when are you going to get a husband, when are you finally going to start dating, you need to start settling down, you need to get a child. They have entered into this marriage of convenience to escape these types of conversations. However, they soon realize that the factory members are getting impatient. And so the entire second half of the novel is going to be looking at their kind of escape from that pressure, from that sort of rigorous path that the factory has put out for them, and we will be going to quite some extremes in that second section. And the imagination from Natsuki's past definitely hasn't been tampered by adult sensibilities. She very much still believes in these sort of fantasies that she created as a child. She believes herself to be an alien, and she and her husband will be exploring alien nature throughout the second half of this novel. I thought it was very interesting, especially the second half of this novel I thought was brilliant. I think if a movie were to be made of this would be a cult classic instantly, and I just had so many visual views of this book within my mind, and I'm not a visual reader, so usually I don't really visualize what I'm reading, but with this book I definitely had a lot of like scenes that just like instantly popped into my mind as sort of like movie screenshots, and if I'm making this movie, it's going to look great. But yeah, I just think it went to such extremes that for me it became brilliant, and for me it pushed all the right buttons. But I can easily see that it could push all the wrong ones, and that you're going to be like, why am I reading this? Or why is there so much gore to it? Because there's definitely a lot of gore. What's the point of this? Why are we going to these extremes just because you don't want to have children? But I do think that you don't need to see this as a sort of realistic read, because that's definitely never what it's going to be. If you don't like unrealistic reads, then this book is not going to be for you. But like definitely as a sort of like dark parable, looking at this subject matter and pushing it to its extremes, I definitely think it's highly successful, and I definitely enjoyed it a whole lot. And then the final book that I read this month is Mordew by Pheby. So this is a book that I started in August. This was published in August as well. It was one of my other most anticipated releases for this year. Sadly, with this one I didn't have as great of an experience. So in Mordew we are following our protagonist called Nathan. Nathan is a young boy who is kind of struggling to get by. He and his parents live in the slums, but his father is very ill, and so he is kind of going about with the other kids from the slums looking for these sort of live forces that live within the living mud in order to sell them, in order to get some money to buy his father's medicines. Now he has a little bit of an edge on other boys because he has something known as a spark. However, he's constantly being told by his father that he cannot use the spark. Under no condition is he allowed to use the spark. So obviously he's going to use that spark at some point, and that's going to kind of put him on the radar of a lot of people within this world, but especially the master. Now I definitely do think it has its merits. I absolutely love the sort of like inventiveness of this world. This world definitely feels very unique, and for like there's a lot of elements that go into that are new elements that the author has imagined that might like have a hint of other fantasy realms or anything like that, but it definitely has its own unique quality to it. However, that's at the same time also its downfall, because it is going to so many new, because it introduces all of these new elements. Basically everything about this world is somewhat new compared to other fantasies that I've read. There are also no boundaries to this world, and I definitely think that the author could have easily used a lot of imagination and still had boundaries to his world, but there definitely don't seem to be a whole lot of boundaries, because there aren't really any rules explained to us about this world or about this magic system. And so also the magic system in itself seems to be boundless, and so that means that there are a lot of like conveniences to this story. You know, a lot of times there are solutions proposed that come out of nowhere, which I don't always have a problem with. I've definitely read books where other people have had these complaints, so it's not something that I dislike in general. But I think in this one, for some reason, it definitely did strike me, because that also meant, in this one at least, that I didn't really feel like there were a lot of stakes, or that there was a lot of direction to the story neither, because it definitely feels a little bit more like a sort of like survival story where this Nathan is just trying to survive everything that's coming at him, and where in the beginning we have this sort of direction to him trying to save his father. Later developments in the novel will just see us trying to kind of figure out the story ourselves, as well as Nathan is just pushed into certain circumstances and is just kind of following along. He doesn't have a goal, he doesn't have a path, he doesn't have any sort of will or direction of his own. He's constantly being directed by others, and all of those elements combine to kind of a frustrating read for me, and one that I couldn't get through at a sort of like decent pace. It would always be like 10 pages at a time or something like that, and then I would already be like, whew, I've been reading this for so long, and then I was like, oh no, I've just been reading for 10 pages. And there were some parts in which I kind of pushed myself through, and I definitely read a lot more in a single day, and I don't know whether that was just me pushing through it, whether those pages maybe were better at that point, or whether it was actually better to consume a big chunk of this at the same time. But in total, I would say that it was a little bit of a letdown for me. I don't know whether I want to continue on with this series or with this author, because yeah, the experience definitely wasn't a very enjoyable one for me, and it could have easily set me in a slump if I would have like pushed through it, rather than the way I did it now, was just like reading 10 pages here or there while I was reading other books, which definitely did still work for me, though I should probably still have DNF'd it. But yeah, I don't DNF easily, that's been established. So in total I read 11 books this month. However, of those 11, only 2 were physical reads, which brings me to the second part of this video. So it's time to discuss my hauls. So this month I also hauled a couple of books. So first book that I hauled is Disability Visibility. You can see there is already a bookmark in there, and I'm very close to the ending. So my wrap up for this one will be coming in the October mid-month wrap up. So this is a essay collection that is edited by Wong, and it is a collection of essays by first-person narrators, people who have disabilities. These are people with very diverse disabilities, so it's looking at more than just your like stereotypical physical disabilities, which is the first thing that a lot of people think about when they hear disability. It's also looking at visible disabilities versus invisible disabilities, for example, and it's also going to be looking at intersectionality. So there's definitely also intersectionality with race, for example, or with like gender diversity and things like that. Next up, I also got the Bastard of Istanbul in the Books That Matter subscription. This is the first month that I've been subscribed to this book box, and I will link the details down below. But so The Bastard of Istanbul is a book by Elif Shafak. I already read one of her books, which was 10 minutes 38 seconds in This Strange World. I had quite of a mixed experience with her book, but overall I definitely did enjoy it, and I did enjoy both parts of that book. I just enjoyed the first half and loved the second half. So I hope that this book is a little bit more like that second half. So in The Bastard of Istanbul we are looking at a household within Turkey, and we are looking at mainly a female-led household, because there's a sort of curse on this house that means that most of the men in the family don't make it past 40. And into this female-led household comes one of their nieces or aunts, I'm not entirely sure anymore at this moment, who is coming from the US, and her entry into this household kind of stirs up old stories, old memories that apparently have something to do with the history of Turkey as a whole as well. And then the final one I got this month is Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Tales from the Cafe by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. So this is the sequel to Before the Coffee Gets Cold. So Before the Coffee Gets Cold is a time travel novel, a Japanese time travel novel, in which we're looking at this cafe where people can go to travel back into time. However, there are certain rules linked to this time travel. The main one is that you can never change anything in the past. Whatever you do in the past, it will never have any sort of effect on the present day. So that was kind of the main concern of that first book, is very much looking at like, why would you travel into the past if there's no way that you can change the present? You know, a whole lot of time travel narratives are all about traveling back to the past to prevent certain things from happening. And because it's very clear about here that that's not one of the possibilities, this book is very much going to look into what would be some of the reasons why somebody would still want to travel to the past, even if there's no way to change the present. As far as I'm aware, this one is going to be looking at mainly a new cast. There are some of the old like staff members that are the same, but apparently this book is set 7 years in the future of Before the Coffee Gets Cold, so a lot of the staff has also moved on. First one definitely was a nice, like, beautiful mix of heartbreaking and heartwarming, which I always love, and I definitely feel like I find a lot of in Japanese literature, and very much looking forward to diving into the sequel as well. But so that means that I have read 2 physical copies this month and purchased 3. So at the end of this month I have a physical TBR of 123 books. So we're not going in the right direction, and I think like this is the 2nd month that I've added a book to my TBR. The month before that I was at the status quo, so it's like 3 months in which there's basically not been any improvement to this TBR, so I need to get this act in order. I need to make a difference in October. I put quite a lot of physical books on my TBR in October. My TBR in October is also way too ambitious, but I'm definitely hoping that I'm going to be able to prioritize for myself the physical reads in October so that I can get this list a bit down, because the goal is still to get to 100 unread books by the end of this year, and it's becoming tighter and tighter to actually get there. So yeah, see you guys for my next one. Definitely let me know down below if there are any of these books that you've read that you want to talk about, or any of the books that I've just hauled that you want me to prioritize. But so yeah, see you guys, bye.